viewers, this is Justin from Brush for Hire with our second video in the Q&A series. I want to start by thanking you guys for all of your comments, questions, and topics that you've presented for us. I would like to also encourage the constructive criticism, emphasis on constructive, that you leave in your comments on YouTube or Facebook. Austin's videos are amazing already. I film off-site when I'm not with him, and in an effort to provide more content for Brush for Hire, I'm trying to improve the level of quality that I'm presenting. For example, in my last video, the lighting at the end was pretty awful, so you couldn't really see the models that I was showing. This video, I'm thinking the lighting has been addressed, and if it hasn't, leave a comment. If there's other issues, leave that as well. I'm striving to make a video that will be pleasing for everybody, and if people don't let me know what the problems or concerns are, I'll never know. So with that being said, let's jump right into these questions. Alright, so the first question is from Jesse Reynolds. When it comes to painting schemes, I see a wide variety of different ideals. One ideal is for realism, so the colors aren't too different from each other, i.e. green and darker, green for Tyranids, whilst the other ideal is for striking colors that make the models pop, i.e. bright blue and gold for Thousand Suns. I personally go for more striking colors that paint my Tyranids black-skinned and red carapace. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts, and what would you recommend to new players who are painting their armies? Would you go for realism, striking, or maybe a mix? Alright. So I would probably fall into the mix category, and that's what I would suggest. I like realism. I don't want to paint my armies cartoony. I mean, I like the models to look realistic, and that's what I would suggest to anyone getting into the painting aspect of the hobby. It's easier, I think, to paint something somewhat realistic than to go for a cartoony look. Adding the mix between those, between realism and striking, I think is the honing point where you want to be. You want your models to look realistic, but you also want to have some flair in there. So, for example, if you have a tactical squad with your Space Marines and the Sergeant has a power weapon, you might do a little bit more pizzazz, so to speak, with his power weapon, maybe some glow effect, some lightning, draw some attention to him. You know, it's easy to overlook an army and just be like, oh, that looks great, that looks real, and move on. But when you look down and you see a couple of small things that pull you in, it's like a total package. So having your sergeants painted that way, you know, some of your plasma weapons, your HQs, some of those need a little flair, just add to your army. But you have to find a happy medium. If your whole army is painted with over-the-top effects and lighting effects and stuff like that, you may be taken away from it. It might be too much depending on what you're doing. So that's my answer for the question. Just try and find a happy medium between realism and striking and see what you can do there. Kevin Garcia, do you guys believe GW or Forge World will ever come out with an Emperor model? If so, how would you guys think it would look? You know, height and design. Also, what stats you think he would have. In terms of size, if he's anything like a Primarch, he would be larger than pretty much everyone else. Stat-wise, no idea. I mean, he's supposed to be one of the most powerful psychics in the lore, so I don't necessarily know that if they would actually make a model with rules. It's not outside the realm of possibilities that they may make a model. I mean, Forge World's doing the Primarchs for the Horus Heresy era right now, but I mean, my honest opinion, I doubt we're going to ever get an Emperor model with stats. We may get a model just as a, hey, this is cool, paint it up, have it around, but I don't think they're going to do that. I mean, if the Emperor is as powerful as he's supposed to be, I mean, I don't know how you would weigh that in. If he was an Imperium model, what would be the counterbalance for the Xenos? I mean, obviously for Chaos you may argue Primarchs or Chaos Gods and things like that, but what about, you know, Tau, for example? What are they going to have to offset the Emperor? So, you know, long answer short, yes, they may make a model. I could see that. No, I doubt he'll have any stats unless it's just for fun, not, you know, tournament legal stats. From Becca Compton. I've watched some of the Mini Wargaming Conversion series, and I'm wondering if you have any experience with other sculpted materials not covered in the video, such as brown stuff or Craftmark Procreate. I've not done too much green stuff work or conversion work. I used green stuff when I have. I'm pretty sure Austin uses green stuff. I've seen some of what he's doing. I imagine he's done a lot more than just using green stuff. I know he's done some resin casting and some of that stuff as well. So, not necessarily positive. If you want an answer from Austin, leave a comment below or ask again on Facebook, and perhaps he'll answer your question personally and let you know what he actually uses. Ethan Vanderwide, hopefully I did not mess up your name. Your question was, would love to see some tips and tricks for doing lettering on banners and armor. getting it neat and readable is something I struggle with. I think a lot of people struggle with this. I do as well. And what I've come to realize is that, first off, the words that you're going to be painting are very small. So they don't necessarily have to be perfect. If you were to write the letter S and it's all curvy, on the model, you may want the appearance of the curve, but it's so small that if the curves are slightly more diagonals than curves, people might not notice. For example, if you're doing lettering, you would want to do as many straight lines as possible before you add the curves. So if you're doing a J, you might go straight down and then just do a straight line over and curve the loop at the bottom. If you start to write your words and do as many straight lines as possible and minimize your curves, it becomes a lot easier. The nature of the brushes and the way the bristles move, it's a little bit difficult to get curves and circular motions. So give that a shot. Try doing as many straight lines as possible. If you're writing ultra, for example, the first letter is U, you can pretty much do 2 straight lines down, try and make somewhat of a curve at the bottom connecting those lines, and then a little tail to make it actually look like a U if you wanted the tail at the bottom. If you just want the capital U, 2 straight lines with a little curve at the bottom. Give that a shot, see if it works, and you may be surprised. The other thing that I have learned with doing the lettering is have the color of the lettering you want to use obviously handy because you're using it, and the color that's under the lettering, maybe it's parchment or a purity seal, whatever color that is, have that handy as well. And once you've finished your letters, use that color, and you can easily go right next to the letters if something's too wide or too thick, and just dab up a little bit with the underlying color and try and tighten up the letters. And it may take some finagling and practice to learn it, but the end result, it may not be Golden Demon worthy, but for basic tabletop standard, it's going to be a notch above the normal stuff. It's going to look pretty cool. If you guys would like some type of tutorial, just maybe showing or explaining my process of doing that, sound off below and we will see if we can make it happen. I know we've talked about doing some tutorials in videos before. I would like to do that. We're still trying to work out technical difficulties, lighting, things like that, and I want to perfect that before I actually try and make a video for you guys because I want you to be able to use it. So, again, as I said at the beginning of the video, if you have any critiques, sound off below, and we will try and perfect this. From Kevin Schwinderman, I hope I got that right. When to wash and when not to wash. Alright, so for basic painting, I think the answer to this is when wouldn't you wash. There are some colors that don't take wash as well as others. Creamy colors, whites, some tans. If you guys are familiar with the old GW paints, bleach bone, you kind of have to know the pigments and the colors. Some of them take wash a lot differently than other colors. If you wash white with black, for example, even if you go back while the wash is still wet and try and get some of it off or out of the recesses, you've pretty much discolored the white already. You have to just kind of balance that out and know when to thin the wash out and when not to. Generally having it a little bit thinner makes it dry a little slower, so you have more time to get it up. So I'm a firm advocate of using the washes because it makes the job a lot simpler, and you can do a lot of effects that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do very easily with a brush alone. So hopefully that helps you out. Alright, next question is from Gerard Boonstra. How do you suggest to paint numerous models at once? Batch painting one by one, color by color, etc. Alright, this question, or a similar question, was asked in the first Q&A, and I had suggested the Army Painter method, and perhaps using their dip. If you don't want to do that, or you're just asking for how to paint a lot of models at once, maybe you're playing Marines and you have 50 tactical Marines, what to do, I would generally base coat a color that is hopefully what you want to use. In my case, I use Ultramarines Blue from Army Painter. And then kind of assembly line it. And for example, if you've got just 10 tactical Marines, we'll start with that. You would start with the first guy, and let's say you're painting on the gold shoulder borders. You paint on all the gold parts on that guy, place him down, get the next guy, do the same thing. And essentially it's an assembly line. By the time you get to the last model, the first one's probably dry. Then you would switch to another color and do all the same parts. This is time consuming and can be a little monotonous, so you got to be prepared. Have a video on or some music, something in the background to take you away from the monotony of just painting the same thing multiple times. You could paint one model at a time and finish them, but if you do that, it takes longer, from my experience. So assembly line it, and as you start to get to the end of the assembly line, the last part, the last few colors you want to do on every model, you know, you get to a point where you're on your last color, you paint model number 1, boom, that model's done. Model number 2, boom, he's done. So at the beginning, it's kind of like going uphill, but at the end, when you're doing the assembly line, it's going downhill. It's just cranking the models out. You're getting the last touches on, and they're done. Alternatively, like I had suggested in the last video, check out armypainter.com. They've got a video that explains how to do batch painting. And if you don't want to go that method, you can always send your models to Brush for Hire. Send us an email, get you a quote, and see what we can do. Jeff Doomer. Cases. How do you transport your models? Expensive case or shoebox? Past and present. Rebasing troop models, fixing a poorly built model. I have transported in a shoebox. When I first started Warhammer 40K, I had shoeboxes with tissue paper, things like that, just to keep the models from wiggling around. I had 2 Predators, and as most of you guys know if you're familiar with 40K, the side sponsons on the generic Predator, the guns are held on by probably, I don't know, maybe probably not even a 1/4 inch of plastic on the little rod that holds them on. They're prone to break. If you magnetize them, you're a lot better off, but they break. Transporting that way, I broke basically every gun on all of my Predators, and my models were getting chipped, they were bouncing around, pewter ones were breaking. It was a nightmare. So I invested in what's called Army Transport from Symbol Designs. That's what I use. And I'm going to show you an example of what it is. Here we've got a foam tray. This has got all my pre-heresy Marine or tactical Marines that I have right now. It should be 25. But essentially this tray has got perforated foam, and you can pluck it into the size that you would like. And generally it's 2x3 or 2x4 for Space Marines. So this, and it's 1 inch height and 1/4 inch on the bottom. So each one of the transports you would ideally have a certain maximum height or width that it can fit of trays. And you can get them from 1 inch trays to I think 4 inch trays, you know, for your vehicles and things like that. But this is just, it's so much neater. The models, you know, if you wiggle it around, they're secured in the foam. It also helps prevent breakages. So the tote that these go in is this right here. It's Army Painter, or not Army Painter, but Army Transport. So open it up, you can see the lid, it's foam, or you know, it's kind of padded type thing. Got a little thin layer there, and then just like I showed you in the other one, there is one of the trays with Marines in it. Trays will come out, just like that, and then there is another tray underneath. And this one holds, I think, 14 inches, give or take, of foam. The retail on that, I think, maybe 65, 70 bucks. A little expensive, but when you compare your storage rate or amount of models you can carry in that case compared to the GW case, it's a big difference, and for about the same price. So I definitely would check out Army Transport. There are some other alternatives out there, but essentially if you get anything that uses foam that you can pluck out a specific design to fit a model, you know, a footprint, so to speak, that's what you probably want to go with. It's the most convenient way to transport models without breaking them. And let's face it, you've either A, spent a load of time painting your models and you might as well invest in a reasonable transport for them, or B, you've paid somebody a load of money to paint your models. So again, you might as well get a reasonable transport to carry them, because you don't want to either A, have to repaint them yourself, or B, get someone else to paint them. You know, protect your investment. So definitely would consider, or would advise, getting some type of carrying case other than a shoebox. From Des Doe, what are your thoughts on basing models? Do you prefer a cleaner, minimal approach, or do you like complex bases? Personally, I have a lot of Marines, a lot of Imperial Guard, minimal Tau. So because I have so many models for Imperial Guard and Space Marines, I pretty much went with sand, flock, a little bit of rocks, some debris, a little bit of razor wire or what is it called? Barbed wire. So I have, you know, stuff like that on there. But it's minimal. Nothing over the top. It just looks like normal everyday battlefield debris. Now for my Tau, I ordered bases from Dragon Forge Designs, and every one of them's got a Dragon Forge base. Because I have a lower model count and it's more of a niche army for me, I wanted my models to have something a little more complex and ornate. So you kind of have to weigh that out. My general suggestion would be, for your basic infantry, just throw on a basing that looks good, it's going to match the rest of your army. And then for your HQs and your, you know, if you're playing War Machine, your solos, things like that, you might want to go a little bit, I don't want to say overboard, but do a little bit more. You want their bases to match the rest of your army, but you might add a little more pizzazz. Maybe they're standing on top of a rock, or they have more ornate debris, something like that. So long story short, basic cookie cut kind of basing on the majority model, especially high model count, Tyranids, Orcs, Imperial Guard, mobs, on your HQs, something a little bit more fancy. What about talking about, or a bit to those who would like to get into the commission business? What were these steps, and how did you build your customer base? What are your lessons learned? If that was too personal, what about info on one-off painting, bruises, 5 o'clock shadows, beard stubble, tattoos, etc.? This is from Craig M. Brooks. So for me, I obviously work for Austin at Brush for Hire, and I started by painting for friends. I basically, hey, you want me to paint that? What would you like? Have a face-to-face interaction with the quality of work they want, the color schemes, things like that. It's easier when you have a face-to-face interaction because you can show somebody, say, hey, here's an example of what I'm talking about. Here's my Codex Marines, my Tau, my Imperial Guard, or here's something I'm currently working on. Here's examples of lightning effects or power weapons, and you can physically show them what you're capable of doing. The other good thing about that is you learn, as you're painting someone else's stuff, they're generally, for me, they push the boundaries of what I knew how to do. They're like, I want this effect. And I would be straight up with them, hey, not super good with that right now, but I will try. If I don't do it well, I'll keep trying and I'll try and get this right for you. So it's a good learning process, and I went through that for a couple of years. Then when I saw Austin's posts looking to hire somebody in North Carolina, specifically Greensboro, High Point area, I could not send my application quick enough. I wanted to make a future career out of being in the miniatures industry. So my suggestion there is don't hesitate to throw an application with anything in life, even if it's not painting. If it's just going down the street to McDonald's, for example, don't hesitate. If that's what you want to do, throw in the application. The worst that can happen is they can say no, and the best thing that happens is they say yes. And, if they say no, you're just out of the time you spend on an application, which doesn't take forever. So that's my suggestion there. Just work with friends first, build yourself up, and then use social media, Facebook, YouTube, forums like DakaDaka. Just get out there, and you want people to know you. You want them to know your brand. For example, with Austin, if you're in the miniatures YouTube video watching thing, or if you're familiar with mini wargaming, you pretty much would know the guy with the mustache. It's Austin, or Brush for Hire if you didn't know his name. And you know that. He's got that charisma or that characteristic about him that you recognize him. You want to set yourself aside from everyone else. You want to be outgoing and friendly, and you want them to recognize you. So you want to do that too, some networking. Now, the second part of your question was asking about bruises, 5 o'clock shadows, tattoos, some stubble, things like that. I have a model out that I will show, and I will go through a bit of an explanation on that in just a moment, but I have two other questions that I'm going to read off before I pan over to those models because they are in similar realm. Nathan Mitchell, thanks for answering one of my previous questions in one of the videos. My question is, how do you go about painting and shading as if it were coming from a light source? I have seen some examples you have, such as the Chaos Sorcerer's Force Weapon, but how to determine what to shade and to what degree from said light source? Basically with that, you want to look at the model and you want to determine, how intense do you want the light? If you've got a Space Marine, he's holding a sword out, straight in front of him, the light source is probably, say it's his right arm, and he's got a sword out like this, the light source is going to be coming from this direction and kind of downward. So you'd want it to be more intense here, less intense down towards his chest area. It takes a little bit of practice, you just got to kind of go at it, but literally just look at the model or turn them, look at an angle, and just kind of like if you're holding a flashlight on something, and imagine the light spreading across it, and that's just the intensity in the area you want the light to be. That seems kind of ambiguous or vague. I'm going to pan over just a moment and show you some lighting effects that I've done, and hopefully you kind of get an idea for what I'm talking about. Carl Phillips, I'd be interested in how someone with limited skills would go about painting glowing effects without an airbrush. I'm trying to paint glowing power sword type models with the light shining onto the armor. Just like the other question, except you're asking how. If you can determine where you ideally would want the light to be, if you don't have an airbrush, once you've determined where you want the light to be and kind of a visual of the intensity, I would look into dry brushing. That's what I do until I get an airbrush to use or get better with it. I do a lot of dry brushing, just layers and layers of it, and you can put on a little bit of dry brushing, mix a little bit more color, a little bit more dry brushing, and just layer it up until you get the effect you want. And I mean, it's pretty simple, and if you're only doing it on a few models, it's not too bad. So I'm going to pan over and show you guys what I'm exactly talking about with the glowing effects and the stubble. All right, so the first question that I said that I would answer, again, was from Craig M. Brooks, and he had asked about bruises, 5 o'clock shadows, tattoos, stubble. You can kind of see some of the facial stubble that he's got going on there. So essentially, I took a little bit of black wash and went under the cheeks and over his face. Went back over a little bit of highlighting to add some lines, but essentially it's just a little bit of black wash. In hindsight, I would advise thinning the wash down just a little bit so you have a little bit more control, a little more time to adjust it and maybe get a slightly more maybe realistic stubble. I like the way this looks, but you guys may want something that's a little bit more forgiving if it goes everywhere. So that's what I would do. Alternatively, if you don't use the wash, you can mix a little bit of black or gray, something like that, with your flesh color. And you might want to thin that down a little bit as well and kind of paint over the cheek or where you want the stubble to be. And you essentially just want a slight contrast between the flesh and where you want the stubble to be. You don't want to have just a big hunkin' black mass where his cheek and his face and his chin is, because it's not going to look realistic. You want it to be darker and still have a little bit of that same flesh color so it looks realistic. If you envision somebody with a 5 o'clock shadow, you see the hair, but you also see the skin underneath. So you want a color that's kind of a combination of both. If you guys would like to see a tutorial on how to do that, sound off below, and if there is any amount of desire for that, we will see if we can make it happen. Alright. For the last two questions that I'm using model examples for, we had from Nathan Mitchell and Carl Phillips. Nathan asks, how do you go about painting and shading as if it were coming from a light source? Carl had asked about painting glowing effects without an airbrush. Alright, so the particular example I have here for you guys is from one of my Razorbacks. Alright, as you can see here, this is a Razorback turret that's been modified. It has a las cannon and technically a plasma cannon bit. I did not really care for the plasma gun bit for the las turret on the Razorback because the plasma gun bit, if you make it, it's just so tiny. So this is a plasma cannon proxying as a plasma gun, and I think it looks awesome. It looks more tanky. So anyway, when you're looking at this is done by hand. I painted the plasma cannon blue, got a little bit of wash, got a little bit of white, do the lines. And then you kind of determine where you want the intensity of that light to be. So I looked at it and I was like, okay, this is under an armor plate. So the light's going to be just around the edges of the armor plate and on the gun. And this is where I just, mixed a little bit of blue and white and started dry brushing around the edges and went further and further out until I got an intensity I liked. Add a little bit more white to your mixture, get a little bit lighter, and then start going around the edges until you get something that's around an effect that you like. This will take a little bit of practice, but it's very easy and it's cheap. The only downside is if you have an airbrush or you're ever going to get an airbrush, this type of effect is probably 10 times faster than airbrush, literally. So if you ever have an inkling to get one, consider holding off until you get one and practice with that. If you're never going to get one or can't afford one, doing it by hand on a few models in your army won't take an awful lot of time, and you can get the effect achieved. Turn this around so you guys can kind of see it from the front. Down a little bit. From this side. Las cannon. So you can see there's no real lighting on this side of it because the las cannon is not lit up. If we flip it over here, so you guys kind of see from the top side of it, you can kind of see where the lighting was and the intensity. Alright, now for power weapons, you could do something very similar. However, you might want to consider wet blending, getting a dry retarder to mix with your paint to do a little wet blending before you actually go into the lighting effects. You can get the fade on the sword that you want, the lightning if you're going to do that, and then at the end do a little bit of dry brushing. You can use that to do the edge of the blade, you can use that to do the intensity on the hands, the forearms, the chest, wherever the intensity of the light is going to be. Alright guys, so hopefully the questions were answered to your liking. Hopefully you got a little insight on glowing effects, the dry brushing of that, how to do the stubble. If that was vague or ambiguous and you didn't understand or want further detail, sound off in the comments below. Let us know. If there's a demand for some type of tutorial, I can add that to the list of things I would like to do. I already want to show how to do power weapons with wet blending, some glowing effects, which kind of goes along the lines of this. I had not considered doing any, flesh or stubble, so if you guys want that, let us know, and that'd be great. In closing, I would like to thank everyone again for your support and giving us your questions and taking some time out of your day to watch this video. And please leave your comments, leave your criticism, let us know what can we do to get better. As long as it's something that's realistic with your concerns, we will try to address that. Again, please, constructive. That's all I can say is constructive. I know some people may not like certain aspects of videos, but if you have ideas for how to make it better, that helps us really a lot. So, that being said, I would like to thank you guys again, and happy wargaming.